questions, and I will do.
Sandy, I'm sorry. Just as you're getting started, I'm going to cut you off. I just want to make sure everybody's okay with my clicking the record button. And if there's any reservations, just hit me in the chat room privately, and that way it's confidential. Thanks.
Okay, so full disclosure, Bill and Mary and I got together and talked through your questions to kind of share our thoughts together. So I'll just open the questions and then we can just kind of share answers to them. So the first question you were asking was, prior to the merger, what was the level of connectivity between the local churches and the local churches in the region? And did it increase the capacity or stay the same? What percentage of churches participated in the regional church before the merger and after the merger? So I'm just going to open it up. Bill, you had a comment just about the word merger, and I think that's important to say.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily apply to you, but it was very important for us not to use the term, and we didn't. We understood ourselves to be coming together to create a new region and not to be merging one region into another or two regions together. Partly, I think that was the disparity in size. Clearly, we didn't want to be, and Montana particularly, I think, did not want to be perceived as being gobbled up by a different, larger region. And we really intentionally did not want that to be what we were talking about. And by not using the term merger, but by talking about creating a new region, we were also able to try to think about how region might be different. And we were sometimes successful at that and sometimes not. As we've all found out, when you try to think how something might be different, how it is often grabs a hold and doesn't want to let go. And so we certainly experienced some of that. But it was important for us to understand. Now, this is neither here nor there. Legally, it was a merger. Legally, we amended the Articles of Incorporation of the Northwest region to create the Northern Lights region and expanded its purpose to include the congregations in Montana. But theologically and polity-wise, we talked very much and we're very intentional about this being a coming together to create something new and different. And we hoped something, to use a cliche, cutting edge, to really think about new ways to do and be region. We've had some success, but again, as always happens, we've had some, some struggles with that. But I just thought it was important that that everybody understood that we weren't talking. It was an important point for us not to talk about merger.
Thanks. And when we talked about that first question about whether congregations were, more engaged before or after, I would say we all looked at each other and said, yeah, we don't think that changed. So the congregations that, were really engaged before continue to be really engaged. The congregations that were kind of peripherally engaged are still peripherally engaged. When we looked at our top giving DMF congregations for 2020, the first year that we were one region together, it was the same 10 congregations that were before, including one in Montana that, when we looked at it in 2019 and said, if we were one region, which would be the top 10 giving congregations, we knew that this one congregation in Montana would be in that list, and they were in 2020. And we knew that another congregation in Montana would be one of the top giving directly to the region, and they were. So giving patterns stayed roughly the same in our first year together. And I would say engagement stayed roughly the same. Now, connections to each other, we have seen connections across the new region and in some really significant ways, and relationships being built. And part of that was COVID. One of the gifts of COVID for us, there were lots of not gifts, but one of the gifts of COVID for us was that it forced us to use virtual communication which we knew we would have to use in order to connect this wide geography. So we had already said we're going to do our board meetings on Zoom. And we had already said our commission on ministry will probably not meet in person. It will probably meet on Zoom. But now our pastors are meeting across the region weekly on Zoom. And our pastor in Anchorage has said he's never felt more connected to the region than he does now. And our pastors in Montana now know pastors in Washington that they may not have known as well and as deeply if we just waited for our first in-person regional assembly to get together. So in some ways, COVID helped bring us together as one region and confirmed for us that, by golly, we can do communication and relationship building and fellowship in this way, in little boxes on a screen. Mary or Bill, you want to say anything more about that first question? And if anyone has questions about any of the answers we give, please jump in, or I don't know, Chris, if you wanted them to say them for the end or put them in the chat, something like that.
One thing I think I've noticed is that while we haven't engaged congregations that weren't engaged before, at any level, I think within engaged congregations, the interest level is higher. They were interested in the process. Eventually, speaking from the Northwest region perspective, they eventually got excited about the process. Not everybody was to begin with, but they eventually got excited, and they continue to be interested in that. My experience is people continue to be interested in new ways that we're doing things, and who are we becoming. So the act of going through the process of becoming a new region has increased the interest level among those who were paying attention to the region at some level already.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's true.
Let's go ahead and put questions in the chat box if you want to ask questions. That way we can all monitor it.
So the next question was, how did they engage the congregations in the conversation? And I'm going to ask Mary to speak to the Montana conversations.
I wore my special sweatshirt tonight for you guys. I lived in Nebraska 40 years ago, but still a big fan. Montana started this conversation many, many years ago. And the reason we started the conversation about what is our next steps was simply that we did not have enough leadership to effectively run an entire region. When you started filling the commissions and the task force and the board members and representatives from the congregation, we just ran out of people. We had very dedicated people, but we just didn't have the numbers to run a region. And so we started talking about it, and I shared with Sandy at one of the meetings, I did a little presentation where I took the names of people who were currently in leadership for the region, and I put a hat on top of their name that said what they were doing. And if they were doing more than one thing, for example, I was the moderator at the time, so I had my moderator hat, but I was also on the Outdoor Ministry Commission, so that hat was on, and we just stacked hats on people's heads. And then I said, but I'm going to show you what it was last year, and I just changed hats, and it was the same people changing hats. And by doing this over and over and talking, it really helped people see that it wasn't that the Montana region was dying. We had lots of people working in that, but to run an entire region by ourselves was just not the best thing for us anymore. And so we started talking about what are some of the things we could do. So we had the whole rent a regional minister conversation where we talked about, well, we could just rent a regional minister, but that really didn't solve the problem. It wasn't that we had to reduce our costs by saying, okay, we can only afford a regional minister once in a while. If we rent a regional minister, actually that causes us to have to do more work because we have to take on all the things that the regional minister would be normally doing. So rent a minister wasn't going to work. And then we talked about that we don't want to just end. because we are still vibrant and disciples. So then our regional minister at the time, Ruth Fletcher, said, what if we partner with someone? Well, we had made a partnership with another denomination, and it started out well, but then it fell apart because communications and people, personalities, it just didn't work. And so the word partnership was not a word that the people in Montana wanted to hear. So then she said, well, why don't we start talking to see if there's anyone who would like to adopt us? Well, that definitely did not fly. We did not want to be adopted. And so then she started talking about, what if we went with someone who was willing to start from the ground floor up and build something new? And that got us excited. And so we visited with a couple of regions. Sandy, the Northwest was one of them. A couple other regions that we did that. So that's how our conversation started. And the more we talked, the more excited people got. And when we talked with the Northwest people, that's where we felt that the best possibility of creating something new would happen. So that's how we started talking. And we just kept talking over and over for a couple of years to bring people to this point where they would say, yeah, I can do this. This will be fun. And then, like Bill said, the interest level in the churches went way high. So that was kind of our story.
It's good. So after and this kind of answers the next question about the why of this, but when the Montana region approached the Northwest region, we had a very small gathering of a few of us in Montana. The feeling from the Northwest region was we were not willing to just adopt them, and we were not willing to swallow them. If we were going to do this, we were going to do something new. And it was the new that excited the Northwest region as well. So we started with area gatherings across the Northwest region, bringing people together and kind of laying this out. And Bill kind of alluded to this. Not everybody was okay with this. They weren't anti the idea. It was kind of like, what's in it for us? And why should we want to do this? And does it mean that we're dying was another question. But the more we talked about it, and the more we talked in terms of not two dying regions coming together, but two strong regions that have resources coming together, eliminating duplication of boards and regional ministers, and so therefore freeing up resources for ministry, that got people interested. So we did area conversations in the Northwest region. And then I think a significant event was a common table event we had in Rathdrum, Idaho, that brought the two regions together, almost in the geographic center of this new region. Not quite, because there really isn't much in the geographic center of the new region. So we were a little to the west, but and this gathering was where we really talked about what were things that we needed to do to build a new region, what were some areas we needed to look at, mission and worship and things like that. But also it's where we chose our new name. Well, we almost chose our new name there. We started out with about 50 suggestions, and going through multiple voting, we ended up with two names, and it was almost a split decision with the Northern Lights just coming ahead of the other. And so we didn't quite name it as our new name at that meeting, but we did some more discernment together and decided, yeah, that was the new name. Bill, you want to add anything to that?
It was just another concern, and it in some ways it remains one, is how do we function if you add up all of the square miles, and a great portion of this is Alaska, but the Northern Lights region is over 850,000 square miles. And that's even without taking all of Alaska into account and just counting Anchorage. That's a lot of space, and it's a long ways from Anchorage to Miles City, Montana. And so how are we going to do that? And that it was a concern by folks. Could it work? Which also got us then thinking, beginning to think, how can we use available technology. And we've worked through a lot of brain, storms about how we might do that. And as Sandy noted, COVID has helped us narrow that down and figure out how to use these. We at one time thought of equipping, area congregations where people in that area could come together, and a particular building would have the technology to have a group meeting, and we could all meet as a group all the way, those kinds of things. But we've since gotten better with this technology, as we all have, unfortunately, and have discovered that we can do that. But that was a real concern, and it still remains one. We're still trying to live into how the region can be present in that broad space without having, multiple staff people, which even as healthy as we are, we can't afford.
Yeah,
so-
and the other thing is, we became our new region started January 1st, 2020. And so we've been at it 1 year, but most of that year was during COVID. So it's that's been an interesting part. The goal is that we have areas, and that area groups can get together in person when it's possible, and do regional. So you still have that personal touch that is different than being on Zoom. But that's not something we've been able to practice yet because of COVID. Camping was another big issue about how are we going to do the camps. And then last summer, which would have been our first camping season, we didn't have camps. So this summer, we're going to try that adventure and see what happens. So really, as COVID restrictions are lifted and congregations are able to do more and more in person, we'll really start being able to practice and try out some of these things that we were hoping to do as a new region.
And I suspect we lost a little integration as well by not having our first regional assembly, where we could actually meet one another, in one place and start to recognize people. As we all know, this is a great system, but it's not the same. Sitting down with a cup of coffee, chatting with somebody.
So that kind of leads into the next question you had, which was what were the difficult spots and how do you navigate them? And part of the answer to that question is we don't know all the difficult spots yet because of COVID. We didn't go through our first cycle of regional assembly and camps and retreats. But we anticipated that the camping program is something we have to navigate because it is was well loved in both regions. And that was a particular area to navigate for the Montana churches. So Mary, do you want to speak about the campground piece?
Sure. We own a camp. The Montana region owned a campground called Cane Ridge West. It's a beautiful property. Of course, I'm prejudiced. But when we were starting to talk about creating the new region, there was a lot of heart-to-heart talk and tears, and some people got angry, and some people, it was a very difficult thing. But it was decided that Cane Ridge West would not go to the new region. And so Cane Ridge West became its own nonprofit. It's under the name Christian Church in Montana, but it's its own entity. And Northwest region didn't have anything to do with it. And now the Northern Lights region will use it, but the Northern Lights region doesn't administrate the property.
Yeah.
So,
and that really, and I think that was a pain point because the Northwest region was very clear. We did not want to own a campground. We didn't own a campground. The one remaining campground in the state of Washington for disciples is Gwynwood, which is near Olympia, Washington. And it has always historically been owned by the congregations on the west side of the mountains in Washington state. So the Western congregations own Gwynwood. So the Northwest region has not owned a campground and didn't want to own a campground. And we were pretty clear about that. And I know that was a disappointment to the Montana folk because they love Cane Ridge West. And so, so they have spun it off to its own nonprofit, and we, you know, we as a region care about these two campgrounds and feel connected to these campgrounds and acknowledge that our congregations own these campgrounds. But you know, it's still, that's still a place where we're kind of growing into the relationship. So now we'll have we're going to try to do in-person camps this year at both Gwynwood and Cane Ridge West at the two campgrounds. And I think one of the fears of the Montana congregations was that no one from the former Northwest region would come to the camps at Cane Ridge West, you know, that they would still be kind of their own thing. And instead of it feeling like a whole region. But one of our congregations on the east side of Washington state that usually brings the most kids to camp has already said they're going to go to Cane Ridge West this year, which will be wonderful for really feeling like we have a whole region camping program. And the camps will be run parallel, but the same age groups in both camps at the same time, with real intentionality about, now that we're good at Zoom, we're going to try and connect the two camps together for the weeks that we have camps. So we're still growing into it. Ask us that question in another year and we will have a different answer about the difficulties and how we've navigated them.
Well, one of the things we discover is that we might be a little closer to the camp in Western Washington, but it might take 3 or 4 hours longer because you have to go through Seattle.
Yeah.
And you can never get through Seattle quickly. So might be a few miles farther, but it's probably an hour or two shorter to drive to Montana.
Yeah.
Because in Eastern Washington and Montana, we don't have traffic. So
Not in the same way anyway.
we don't allow it. We knew we would live into who we will be. But we certainly found touch points when we were drafting governing documents. I was on the group that was doing that, and we tried to do what we thought was thinking out of the box. And we tried to be really creative in how we would put together governing documents for a new time in a new way. And we were semi-successful, but we did run up against people who weren't ready to let loose of certain ways that we've governed ourselves for, generations. And so we had to kind of find a middle ground there. But when we did draft governing documents, we tried to make them flexible enough that they can be easily adapted into whatever it is that the region becomes. Because we know we're going to spend these several years, and we're probably a little behind now, figuring out how this is going to work and who we're going to be, and more importantly, what our vision and mission and ministry is going to be as the Northern Lights region.
One of the places that we thought we knew where we were going, and then COVID hit, around staffing. So recognizing the miles and recognizing the limitations of one full-time regional minister, we had talked about part-time staff in different parts of the region. I live in Spokane, Washington, although the Northwest region and now the Northern Lights region does not have a physical office. Northwest hasn't had a physical office for 11 years now. So the regional minister really can be located anywhere. But we had talked about it and even started to draft job descriptions for people someone located in Montana, someone located in Seattle, to kind of be not quite associate regional ministers, but certainly bridges to congregations and be a closer physical presence. And then COVID hit and we weren't sure financially what that was going to do to us. In the end, we did okay, but we did just fine actually, but we didn't know that. So we kind of put on hold any additional staff. And now coming out of COVID, I think I'm rethinking, and I think the board is rethinking, what does the regional minister have to travel to do? And therefore, is it still the right model to have people deployed in those places, or is there another model of staffing? So that's a piece that we don't really know yet. Chris, you said, can you say more about the adaptive culture of the new region? Let me see if I'm answering the question when I answer this. I think we've come into this region knowing that any governing documents we're putting in place, we're not written in stone. And that any ways we have of being are not written in stone, and that we're going to have to live into what this region looks like and how it lives together. And there was a real sense of, that's okay. We don't have to know all the answers yet. We believe that God's leading this. We believe that there's a willing spirit to explore. We know we're going to make mistakes. And so we kind of tried to build in a spirit of grace and acceptance for those mistakes, a recognition that some will be disappointed and some will think this is the most wonderful thing, and that what we're creating doesn't have to stand for the next 50 years, that this still may be a transitional moment. So that's kind of the spirit we've come into it with, that we didn't have to have all the answers before we did this, and we still know we don't have all the answers. Does that kind of answer the question, Chris? So that kind of leads to your last question, which was kind of laying out how you're doing this and what are some questions that you would encourage us to consider given our approach to forging this partnership. And when Mary and Bill and I talked about this, we kind of looked at each other and said, I think it's really important to know the why. So why are you doing this? And why do you think this is important to be having these conversations? So that's the biggest question we would have for you, about the why.
Because obviously the how will flow from that. And as we all know, if you don't have a why, then you're not going to be, whatever you end up with isn't going to be terribly successful. But that, that was probably some of our early struggles, the wrong term, but challenge is that was changing that to helping people understand what the why was. As Sandy mentioned earlier, that particularly in the Northwest region, it's kind of, why are we doing this? What's the point? And when you can begin to identify that, as we did with, we want to create something new and find new ways to live as region, and to find the ministry that God's calling us to in this vast space. And at that point, then people began to kind of get excited about it, because we all know that we've at least those who have been active in the regions for a while all know that it's in many ways hasn't changed much since 1968, or even the state associations before that. And so everybody can get excited about finding a new way to do that.
Yeah, I would say the why for the Northwest region at the very beginning was simply that our sisters and brothers in Montana have asked us to have this conversation. And that was enough of a why to start the conversation. They've asked us to have this conversation, and so we're going to be open enough to have this conversation. Then as we had the conversation, we started to recognize the connections that the two regions had already had for a long time. And, we've had ministers going back and forth across those state lines for decades, and people could point to, well, I grew up in this congregation in Montana, and now I'm over here in Washington, and there's just a lot of connections. So As we did that, we realized we really had more in common, and the values that we held were more in common. So it started to make a lot of sense. One other thing that we did, Marriott, hold on a second. One other thing that we did that was, I think, was really key, and I really credit Ruth Fletcher, the former regional minister of Montana. She arranged for the two of us, Ruth and I, to go on a 2-week road trip through Montana so that I met all of the congregations in Montana. So before I became their transitional regional minister, I had been in their buildings, I had talked with them, and they had some sense of knowing me. And I think that has been invaluable. It just set me up way ahead with relationships with those congregations. Mary?
Well, I noticed that one of the questions in the chat was about who needed to know the why. And our feeling was everyone. And to be upfront about whatever the why is. Ours was, in Montana, we can't staff a region, but we want to continue doing church, and we want to be in a disciples region, and we want to create a new one. And so we made sure that every congregation had a chance to hear that message. And then once we had what was called the new creation team, we were rocking it, I'm gonna tell you. We created this PowerPoint, and I think you might have the PowerPoint, but we went out in teams, one person from Montana, one person from the Northwest, and we met in churches and invited, area churches so that it wasn't every single congregation, and gave our little, if you want to call it the dog and pony show. But I think what it did was it answered the questions of why, and that we're not trying to hide something from you. Because we talked about finances, we talked about all the areas that we were going to be, creating, the Commission on Ministry, how all that was going to work. But it also gave people from the Northwest region a chance to see that people from Montana are real people, and the people in Montana could see that people from the Northwest region are real people, and we're going to all work together. But for me, the answer to who should know the why, for me, it's everyone. So it's really important, I think, to know what is the motivation behind, what is the reason why you're looking at doing this.
Yeah. And the communication all the way, we had a communication strategy to really bombard the congregations with this is what's going on. Not that they read it necessarily, but we put it out there. Maybe some questions. Oh, go ahead, Mary.
I was just saying, we also attended each other's regional assemblies, had a lot of people come to the regional assembly where we were talking about actually going into the creation. And then we had what was the Montana region's last regional assembly, and it had a lot of friends from the Northwest region come. And then people from Montana went to the regional assembly in Sumner.
Right.
So that also helped. And then I noticed a question about endowments, and that I'm not the money person, but I know that was an area that we really talked about and we're very careful with.
I can answer that. I'm the treasurer.
There you go.
I'm the treasurer of the Northern Lights region. Montana had funds invested with the Christian Church Foundation and the Church Extension. A portion of those funds were set aside to serve as an endowment for Cane Ridge West and the new corporation that was created to own Cane Ridge West. But most of their endowed funds and church extension funds came to the new region. So the Northern Lights region has all of the endowments and gift funds from both regions. Both former regions those funds are part of the Northern Lights region. Those with restrictions still have them. We didn't get rid of restrictions or anything. Some of the funds from Montana were designated for new church or for scholarships. And those funds are still dedicated to that, though they're now available for new church and scholarships for the Northern Lights region, not just for Montana. And that was important, I think, for the creationists to no longer speak of Montana and Northwest, but to speak of Northern Lights, and to be aware that whatever we have, it's for the Northern Lights region, not for just Montana or just the Northwest region. So that was, I don't know about new legacy gifts. I'm not aware of anyone who has decided they're not going to leave a legacy gift because it's no longer one region or the other. So I guess we'll live into that. And we haven't put together a strategy yet. I know that's something we need to do, but we haven't put together a strategy yet to encourage legacy gifts for the new region. And it's on our list of, there are a number, seems like every time we have a finance committee meeting, there are things that we're having to go through that we forgot about or we haven't gotten to yet. Or, for example, Sandy and I are meeting with Rick Reisinger Thursday, I think, to talk about the money that we have with Church Extension and what our options are with that, and how, it's now all in the name of the Northern Lights region, but what are our options to go with that? Because we just hadn't gotten to that. We've been working on our foundation money for a while to get it organized, and we've done that. So it didn't affect it in any kind of negative way. And all of it is now the legacy funds and the endowments of the Northern Lights region.
What other questions do you have for us? How can we be helpful to you?
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment, and that is I am amazed about your not willingness, but ability to sit in this adaptive space without clear answers for everything you want answers for this length of time, and people's openness to do that, because that's really hard to hold people in that kind of space for a long time. So kudos to you for figuring that one out.
I think that's a place that was kind of the part of the culture of both regions before. I know it was in the Northwest region that we had been in a place of being okay with provisional tri for a long time. And since the Northwest region had done a envisioning process, a decade or more ago. And so I think that helped. Yeah, and just keeping the anxiety level down. One of the things we hoped congregations would experience was both a sense of expanded horizons, that they had more of a family to call upon and that could be resources for them and partners with them. And at the same time, we hope they wouldn't notice any change. That, as far as they felt about their connection to the region, they would feel like they still had that strong connection to the region, that the region was still responsive to them, that when they called, someone would pick up the phone or answer the email. And I think they are feeling that way. And I check in with Montana pastors regularly to make sure that I'm not missing stuff. And I check in with the Washington pastors for the same thing. I should also say we renamed our areas. And so before, Montana was its own region. And then within the Northwest region, we had 4 areas, and they were all geographic. So you had Northwest, Southwest, Central, and East. Well, those names didn't work anymore when the East area was really now in the center of the region. So we renamed the areas for more geographic descriptive names, because we liked Northern Lights. We weren't going to get real bogged down in non-creative names. So the Montana churches are now the Big Sky area. And all of Central and Eastern Washington is the Columbia area, after the Columbia River that flows through it. And what was formerly the Northwest uh, northwest area of the Northwest region is the Salish Sea area, which is a traditional Native American name for the geography of that area. And what was the southwest area is now the Tahoma area, which is the native name for Mount Rainier. So we were pretty conscious of that. Do you have any concerns about equal distribution of geographic leadership over time? Lori, can you say more about that question?
Sure, you've got some heavily populated areas with some big churches, and then you've got this wide expanse that has to be covered. And I was just curious as to whether or not you'd had any kind of discussions about making certain that all the different areas had some kind of coverage of leadership in terms of who was participating in the region.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bill, you could take this one.
Well, when we created the regional board, we made sure that each area has this 2 representatives, lay and clergy, and men and women. And I presume we'll keep trying to do this. Currently, the 4 officers there are 2 from the former Montana region and 2 from the former Northwest region.
No, actually, the 4 officers cover the 4 areas.
Do we? Oh, you're right. They do.
Yeah.
I had missed that. And we have, at least I know when we put together the finance committee, we made sure that there was someone from each of the areas. So that
Ministry has representation from all 4 areas. And actually, we don't have any big churches. So we have big cities, but we don't have any big churches. So the churches in the Seattle area worship about the same as the larger churches in Montana. So in that sense, there's more equity. There are the way we've divided the areas, there's roughly the same number of churches in each area. So there are more churches in the Seattle and north to the border area than there. It's about the same number as there are across the whole of the Big Sky area. But we tried to really treat it equitably across. There was conversation as we were setting up the board about whether the former Montana region, now the Big Sky area, should have more representation than the rest, like they would have as many as the other 3 areas. And it was actually the Big Sky area congregations that said, no, that's not treating us equally. That's not treating us as part of the whole region. That's treating us differently, and we don't want that. So there was a good bit of give and take across the whole thing, and a real sense of, if we're going to do this, we're going to do this as a new region, not as 2 regions trying to smash together. Now, will we have to re-switch, redraw area lines? Some of our congregations aren't going to make it, but that's true across the whole region. And so over time, where the congregations are will change. And I hope that we continue to adapt to that.
Are there any other questions for our guests before we thank them and let them get on their way and have their dinner?
I have one question. How many congregations are we talking about?
We have 52 across the whole across the whole region. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So Sandy and Bill and Mary, thank you all. Really appreciate this has been very insightful. I know you've given us a lot of fodder to shovel through here. And so we'll let you all go and say thank you and goodbye.
Well, thank you.
you
It's
for
good to be
having us.
with you.
Thank you.
Blessings to you on your conversations.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
Chris, do you want to see what questions or key learnings people might have gotten out of this, or you want me just to get it going?
I think you already did get it going. I just keep going. That's whatever. Yeah.
So what were the big takeouts from all of this? That's not the right word, but what caught your attention?
One thing that really resounded with me was the why, and how well can each of us articulate the why in our current regions and to our congregations. And I think it might be good for us to revisit that, the why, so that we're all on the same page.
Okay. Just jump in there, folks. I see Ruby. getting ready.
I think it was also of interest that the word merger is not in their vocabulary and that discussing this, that it was a new region. And I think that that's probably a very wise way to go.
It reminded me of,
Go ahead. No, that's
it reminded
okay.
me of some university conversations when some schools, colleges have been having hard times financially. And so they were in discussions and one school thought it would be a merger and the other school was like, no, it's a takeover. You have no money. We have the money. So I guess, merger or whatever has these power dynamics already based in the name that I assume they're trying to get away from any power dynamics baggage that would be there. So yeah, the use of language is very important.
And we frequently use the word partner, and that was a word they chose not to use. So I liked, their comments that we're doing something new.
It does.
But that seems to be imagining because we're asking you all to imagine together.
It does seem that their purpose was a little more need-based than ours, where we're concentrating on congregational vitality and how we can strengthen that vitality across congregational, regional, general lines by collaborating, by partnering our work together. It's not maybe so much based on need as it is a desire to partner and make stronger or more vital our congregations.
Ken, Steve, Megan, what do you think? What did you get out of that?
Well, I liked especially that they were willing to include everybody along the whole way. Any congregations, all of that, and like the transparency of the whole thing. Nothing was a secret or anything like that. We want you to know what's going on. We want you to know how it's going. And it seemed like they wanted input as well. So I thought that was pretty important in getting people to accept and to actually collaborate in creating the new region for them.
Anyone else? I'm not really sure who Get Jesus Soon is.
That's Kevin Harris, Dr. Kevin Harris.
Dr. Kevin Harris, it's good to have you on.
It's good to be here. I've been here. I had to pick my wife up, so I was driving while she held the phone. So,
no problem.
How many congregations do we have in each of our regions?
In the greater Kansas City region, we have 74 that report and are active, 82 on the books.
Okay.
Kansas is getting ready to lose 2 of the 80. So we'll be down to 78.
And Nebraska is at 40.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Chris. How many in Nebraska?
Nebraska has 40.
I didn't hear him. Did you?
Uh-oh.
40.
40?
I'm concerned that you can't.
All right. Anything else before we move on? Yes, Bill.
Oh, Laura, since you were asking us, what did we get from the conversation? And one of the things that jumped out at me was an emphasis on what God is calling us to do. I so appreciate that. Yeah, and a sense too that an awareness too that the church was going through changes. It wasn't just those two regions, but church life in general is changing, and and maybe because I've had more conversations with Sandy and with Bill Jennison, there was also an awareness of that during the process, that after COVID and even before COVID, we knew that there was change on the horizon. We just didn't know what it was, but we knew we were all going to be affected by it.
I think that connects with the comment I made to her, the faith that it takes to just hold steady as you learn is remarkable. And I loved hearing that, their willingness, not that it's easy to do that. And I'm sure they probably had pressures at times to move faster, but their willingness to just hold their faith and know that they were going to learn and figure it out. So I loved that space that they were able to create.
Do we know how long that process was as they were learning, as they were planning, as they were collaborating? Do we know how long that process was?
I thought I heard 2 years of dialogue and conversation and planning and preparing. Was anybody hear something different?
Can you all?
I heard that Montana was in conversation with themselves for 2 years as they were trying to figure out where to go. And I got the impression that when the Northwest region joined in, it was probably at least another year of conversations and intentionality. So there's another 2 years, Chris. So it wasn't a quick process.
Can you all hear me? If No. Okay.
Chris, you almost sound like you're in a cockpit and somebody turned the volume down. And you were coming in clear. Oh, perfect.
Okay. I must have bumped my thumb on one of the buttons, and anyway. One of the things we might want to pay attention to is the regional culture, because I spent almost 10 years in Pacific Northwest. It is a culture that is adaptive and goes with the flow. There's a real ease and comfort with allowing things to unfold that I don't experience in the Midwest. And I lived in the Midwest now for 28 years. I've only been in Nebraska 3 years, but I've been in the Midwest for 25 plus more years. And I don't experience, so I think we want to pay attention to that cultural difference. And I'm not probably the one to best explain it or describe it. But I think maybe we can ask questions of each other, like what fits for us culturally? I think adaptive change and adaptive culture and adaptive leadership are vital for our being able to move this forward. But how do we do that here in the Midwest? Very, very different cultures there with strong immigrant settlements, especially from Southeast Asia. Very large population centers. It really affects the culture there.
That is very real. If it's all right with you all, we still have almost 30 minutes, 25, I guess, and we have a whole nother conversation to have with Daryl and Justin. And Joyce, of course, is in all of these conversations. Yay, Joyce. So Kelly sent his regards. He was on his trip back from visiting grandchildren in Mission, Texas, and didn't think he would make it in time, just in case we had to get started without him. So Daryl and Justin, I don't know, Justin, did you get my email? right before?
Yeah, yeah. When I was at work this afternoon, I saw your email and I thought, oh no.
So, take it away, guys.
Well, I'll just initiate it. Justin, jump in.
Well, I was actually curious, really before we did that, I just didn't want to lose anything that was said or what we just said about our interview that we just had. Was there like anything we wanted to do with that? Or like anywhere we wanted to go with those thoughts and information? I don't know. Just we waited so long for that interview and to get the information from them. I thought, I don't know how much of a hurry we're in, that's all.
I have no problem with hanging on to the conversation we're on to make sure we've covered it. If we don't mind waiting to do local congregations the next month, that's up to the group.
Maybe that's a wise thing to do a little more processing of tonight. And since Kelly's the one that drafted the letter, to be fair to Kelly, he might have some input that he'd like to say. I mean, we all met and worked on the letter together. But if you've not had a chance, why don't you take time throughout until the next meeting to again look at the draft questions and look at the letter and what changes would you make? Is there anything that's not included? And I think particularly on the back, I mean, we just kind of put something together. One of the questions that we have is how do we get this information out to all of our churches? And so, you know, this is kind of a proposed way of doing it, and you might have other things that you would like to see. So just make sure that you peruse this document really well, and I guess.
We just came up with the question. We just talked about the questions. I was surprised there was a whole nother page with all that other stuff, honestly, myself. So
Kelly is
like,
very efficient.
I was like, well, I didn't talk about any of that stuff, but here it is, you know.
Well, then I definitely think we need to wait, if that's okay with everybody else on the call, and we'll stick with Northern Lights and how that might have influence on us. So.
Well, one comment, Lori, that jumps out as I'm just glancing over the letter that we want to look at closer. You know, it's signed Yours in Christ Jesus, the Tri-Regional Partnership Committee. Do we even need to think about what we're calling ourselves? Do we want to use that word partnership, since verbiage was so instrumental in the success of Northern Lights? Just throwing that out there.
Someone's trying to talk and I think they're muted.
I think Ruby stepped away from her computer and
I'm wandering around. I'm sorry. I had something cooking on the stove. I had to check on it. I apologize. Okay, I missed it. What'd you say, Lori?
Oh, I just wondered if somebody had made a comment, but apparently it was you checking on dinner and it smells really good. So
I think that partnership, I guess that becomes a question, is partnership is different than a merge or a whole new region. And I don't know that we've made that kind of decision, have we?
Can I make a suggestion? That right up until now, this has been a tri-regional partnership exploration committee.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
I'm okay with adding exploration.
And Joyce, you had a way of phrasing it when I asked you this question earlier, when you and I and who was the other person talking? Justin. When we were all talking, you had a pretty succinct definition of the difference between a merger and a partnership.
I'm not remembering that.
I
so
did.
I'm glad it was good, but I don't remember saying that. So go for it, Justin.
I don't know what I said, actually.
I think we were comparing Northern Lights to what was happening in Illinois, Wisconsin, and was it Michigan?
Yeah.
And they were doing a partnership where they maintained their separate identities, separate this, separate that, separate endowments. You know, everything was separate, but they were doing ministry together, as opposed to what was happening with Northern Lights forming a whole new. Does that ring a bell now? Obviously not. Okay. So
I really don't know what I said. Maybe you know what I said, or you can summarize me. You seem to know that it was good, and I said it, but that's all I got.
I was so impressed, Justin. So impressed. So those of you who were having this conversation before you brought in the rest of us, and I guess that would be Steve, Ken, Bill, and Chris, what were your initial thoughts? Were you looking at partnering and doing shared ministry together, or were you looking at becoming something different?
So I'm looking for a document that I used. I put together something for our work. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. When we were working with two of our disciple churches here in Lincoln that wanted to merge, but they weren't sure they wanted to use that word because it does carry such connotation. I put together a document that outlined 5 or 6 different ways that churches could partner. And that was the word we use as the umbrella. And it moved anywhere from the kind of a sharing networking to cooperating with each other. Like, maybe we share our offices and we have one support person for both churches, or so cooperating. I don't do this. I do much better when I have a chance to really think ahead. So I'm winging it like this is falling short. But there were 5, and collaboration was another one. But collaboration is where you're putting skin in the game. You're not completely losing your identity, but you're saying Nebraska is going to offer to do. The 3 regions will give up everything they're currently doing around Commission on Ministry, and they'll do that jointly. For instance, that would be a true collaboration. Not one of the regions keeps something back and says, oh no, we're going to do it ourselves. Well, that's not a collaboration. That's something else now, right? I'm choosing things out of thin air. I'm not saying that would probably not be the place to start, but that would be one way to think about a collaboration, sharing resources. The other thing that, and that's, I think, the way that I described it when I called Ken and Bill and talked about this one-on-one with you, was it was kind of exploring what does this partnership need to look like, and in different places it might take on a different shape. It might be that Nebraska says, hey, we could use some administrative support, and you've got a full-time person who's able to absorb maybe 8 or 10 hours a week for us. So how do we do this? Can we share some? And then that's where the contracting services, or Bill says to me, we've got a church that is really in need of this particular area, and I know you've got experience in that, Chris. Can you come down and work with these churches in that particular area, so that the Nebraska, Kansas City, Kansas lines begin to get blurred based on specific ideas, projects, initiatives. I'm not doing it. If you give me a few more minutes, maybe somebody else can talk. I'll keep looking for this document because it was pretty succinct. And I could pull it up on the screen so you can see it. And I try to describe each of those 5 different areas.
And I would say, yeah, I would affirm everything Chris has said, and would add that we also talked about the fact that we know that regional ministry has to adapt to new realities. We just we're not completely sure what they are, and we shouldn't be having that conversation just among regional ministers. This really needs to be a conversation with congregations. And so there's real energy behind that, and an openness and an awareness that we don't know exactly what the end product is, but we have some idea of what we hope the end experience will be, that people will feel more the value of covenant and realize that this is something that's divine as well as human, that this is something that God calls us to and not just something that we dream up on our own. And the opportunity to have conversation about that and to engage congregations and leadership in those conversations, that was pretty energizing for me.
I like their energy they had, their positivity, like seemed they were able to imagine beyond what they were doing. In a way that was good, I thought. That's kind of just struck me as like how they talked about it and the energy they had and the positivity that was there. Yeah, I don't know. That's what has stayed with me. So how do you interject that type of energy in your language then too? Or, and if we do documents or questions, I don't want to sound like boring, like, oh, and these processes we are undergoing. But even I think, yeah, it'd be interesting to think about how even in what we write reflects those kind of conversations as well.
That might get somewhat back to the earlier comment I made, Justin. I think you're right. Their creativity and energy was, and I think that it's much resided in Sandy and Ruth. So then the question for me is, what's the culture? What's organic to the Midwest and what's real? Do you all have okay if I just pull up this document on the screen share screen or whatever? So this is what I came up with, and for these two churches. One was a networking, connected by relationships, formal, informal, exchange ideas, strategies. So some of what we already do, but making it a little bit more formal, maybe particular areas, especially, and I can send this out to you all. Movements, collective action with a common shared framework. So let's say that we decided we wanted to really work together across 3 regions on, I'm going to pick something, please don't throw darts, on Poor People's Campaign or anti-racism, Black Lives Matter, and say, we're going to get involved in this movement. And so the 3 groups would join together as part of a movement, moving, right? Coalition building, committed to agreed upon purpose using a shared decision-making process structure, joint council. So we might form a joint, this is what the Tri-Conference Ministries of the United Church of Christ has decided to do after, I think they've been at this now for 3 years. They were going to try to merge the 3 conferences, Nebraska, Iowa, and South Dakota. Those 3 conferences are going to remain separate, and they've created a 4th entity as a joint council. And the only thing that conference is for staff. They have no church members. I'm not sure how they're doing that, but that was just news to me the other day. So that would be another ways. Collaboration. And this is where it may be more about not just the regions, but others as well. Are there others? But do we have other resources besides the region? Our camps, our conferences. We have a college in Forum here in Nebraska. Strategic alliance, pursue a common goal, but maintain our organizational independence. We would align our programs and our ministries, our administration, but we wouldn't lose our identity. Joint programming, we talked, that was another one that just, if we wanted to do men's ministries together and camp and conference together, or whatever the ministries might be. And then shared services. Like I was saying, we could contract for services, and then finally merger. And that's combining the organizations, integrating one entity into another entity and creating an entirely new 3rd entity, which is my understanding of a merger. But legally, it is a complete takeover, which is what Bill was referring to. Is legally on the documents, That's what these two churches did. They ended up merging, but nobody knows that. They see themselves as a new church, new name, new identity. They're walking into the future as a new church. They don't talk about merging, but that's what they legally did.
And if I can just interject for just a second, what Chris just did in sharing that document is an example of some of the possibilities in these relationships we have with each other. It wouldn't have occurred to me to put a document like that together to help congregations think through all the different options. But now that you mention it, Chris, I mean, that's a very useful description of opportunities for congregations. And so I think we've just demonstrated in some way some of what we were hoping originally, how this conversation might go and what might come of it.
Again, this is where, as we get to know each other, I come with a boatload of history around organizational and church development, where I think about this stuff. I consulted with groups for 10 years doing all of that work and helping them to differentiate, well, how do you want to partner? What does that really mean? That's not it's an easy word to say, but it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
Can I say something? Just, it's been floating in my mind at the just listening to everyone, you, Chris, and the other group we interviewed. So it's going to be, how do I say it? So we think of history two ways usually. Like, history is what's happened, but then there's also another history. It's what's moving forward, being able to look back and see what was developing and moving, forward. What to grasp there, what intelligibility kind of there is, what was moving forward out of all the data, all the things that happened in the past. And I guess kind of what struck me is I felt like they had a really good handle on like what was moving forward when they were telling their story, what they were doing. And it just kind of struck me tonight how important it is to have a grasp on like what's moving forward. Like, what is the kind of overall vision of what do we want to be moving forward? Like, this is where we've been, but this is what we want to do. This is what we want to move forward as. And that's just kind of sticking out in my head right now.
What else, Ken? You got something on your mind there?
No, I just want to affirm what everyone has been saying. I think we are seeking to get a better grasp upon what it means to be regional church, and be able to define it in such a way that that those who make up the regional church and the three separate regions can grasp it in a way that they're excited about, and they're willing to, the language I've been using lately about this is every organization needs to have this sense of a common purpose that is so exciting that they're willing to devote their lives and their fortunes to seeing it come into being.
Thanks, that was good. What's our takeout of this conversation that we've been having? Where does this lead us to our next meeting besides making Kelly explain some of his document? What are you all envisioning? What's giving you energy in this conversation?
I think maybe laying the groundwork. I think there's a lot of preliminary work that we maybe need to do to kind of establish that foundation in which we function from. I don't know. I don't know that we have all of the information that we kind of need to kind of propel to the next step. I just maybe the groundwork. I think we need lay a lot of groundwork.
One of the things I'm noticing is I'm not hearing anyone say no or try to put restrictions on any of this exploration right now. I think what Chris showed us is there's such a variety of potential for being together in whatever way that transpires to be, in addition to what we've already done here. And I've appreciated the energy that you all seem to be taking from the conversation with Northern Lights. It's still in this room now. And even if you don't have a why out of necessity, it feels like you have a why out of desire at a minimum. A desire for something different, new, creative, energizing, etc.
Thank you. That's great, Joyce. Other comments? Daryl, Ruby, Megan?
Mind if I add just to what Joyce said?
Please do.
Going back to the first, which I think you were asking, Lori, is what's giving us energy from this conversation? And Joyce saying, we have a why of desire. There's an energy, it's energizing. Maybe that's the next step for next month, in addition to Kelly's letter, is asking us to drill down into that energy.
Okay.
That gets to some of what Justin was talking about. If we're going to move forward, we need to know what it is we're bringing with us. So however that gets hatched or designed or processed, it, you all are smart, wise people. You'll design a good way, but that seems to be the common thread that as I'm looking at the notes in front of me, that question of energy and desire, why. I think if we could drill that down a little bit deeper.
That sounds great. And I do not know who the next region is that's going to take over the.
No, we said it was
Opportunity.
last month, it was Kansas City. Now it's,
Kansas.
so that means next time it's
Nebraska.
Nebraska. Yeah.
Justin, talking about being able to drill something down. Justin, it's just that knack. So Nebraska, who's gonna lead and what's she gonna be? You're gonna be meeting with apparently me and Joyce and a regional minister of your choice, I suppose. I don't know. Chris, I'm guessing you would be the regional minister for that conversation?
I don't know. Has Steve had a chance to do that?
Steve did it with me.
Oh, did he? Okay. Yeah, I'm more than happy to do that. And Megan, are you up for that? Mike Ness is not here tonight. I just realized that's who's missing.
I will say it's not my strong suit, but if you guys are willing to work with me, I could try.
All right, so I'll let you guys take the lead on setting up a meeting between the 3 of us and 4 of us with Joyce. And Joyce, you put together our meeting, so maybe this is your bailiwick to pull people together for meetings like that?
And try.
Okay. And our next meeting is up in the air because Kansas is going to be, some of us in the Kansas region are going to be having a clergy retreat, which I'm sure if any of you wanted to, Steve and Ken would let you all join in if you wanted to make the trip to Tawakoni and join us. Joe Bessler from Phillips Theological Seminary is going to be the presenter. And I have never had the opportunity to study under him, but I hear he's fabulous. So
He definitely is. He was one of my professors. So yeah.
good.
While we have so many people in the room together, do we want to see if we can quickly find the date if the 27th is not going to work?
Yes, that's my hope.
We put on the agenda possibilities of the 19th, 21st, or 22nd. Would any of those work?
I cannot do the 22nd. The 19th and 21st are okay.
Just a second.
Lori, where's Tawakoni? I've never heard of that. I'm from Kansas.
It's just outside of Wichita, just east of Wichita, Kansas. I
How do you
guess.
spell it? How do you spell it?
Go ahead, Steve. Tawakoni, Tawakoni.
Interesting.
Laughing at me.
How does April 19th Monday night look for folks?
It's good for me.
Okay.
At what time?
We meet at 7. We'll be done just in time for you to have a prayer meeting.
Okay, that's fine. I've done that before.
I think KU plays that night, don't they?
What did you say?
I think KU plays that night.
That
Maybe.
was terrible. That was a terrible taste. Oh my goodness.
Goodbye.
I guess they don't play. That was pretty awful. Pretty
We
awful.
also need to check in with Terry Hord Owens.
Okay.
Check in what?
With Terry Hord Owens.
To see if she can
Oh.
join us. Oh, I'm not a KU fan. I just knew they lost. So I was like, how could you?
I'm a huge
Well,
fan.
Oregon's still in, just
Turned it
for the record, Oregon's still in.
So I said the 19th at what time?
7?
7.
7?
Ruby, you're muted. Ruby, you're muted.
I can't do it on Monday night. That's our board meeting, church board meeting. But that's okay. I'm the only one.
Well, the 21st was the other option. I was just trying to narrow the pool.
Sure.
Does the 21st work better for people?
I can do the 21st.
I can do the 21st. I just can't do the 22nd.
What about you, Joyce?
She helped pick those 3 choices, so.
Okay,
Would somebody be willing to check in with Terry Hord Owens and Mike Ness and Kelly to make sure that that date works for the 3 of them as well?
I would be glad to contact Kelly and Terry, so. Let's say that it's going to be at 7 o'clock on the 21st, which is a Wednesday night. And Steve, thank you all for your participation. I really appreciate it.
I wanted to ask Chris, is that document something that I could read too, that you read aloud? I wanted to look over that. Is that possible for me to see?
You bet. I was going to attach it with the notes, but yeah, did you
Okay.
not
That
see
would
it
be
on the
awesome.
screen?
I saw it on the screen. I just didn't take a screenshot. That's
No,
all.
no. Yeah, absolutely. Of course. I'll send it. Yep.
Perfect.
And feel
Thank
free to edit it and do whatever you want. It's highlighted and has the voting scores when we were deciding which direction to go. So just take that stuff out. But yeah,
Just send
absolutely.
it to all of us, right?
That's right. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
That'd be great.
You
It's
bet.
a good looks like a good document.
It's a starting point, maybe. Yeah.
Well, that's
That's
maybe
It's
you don't have
adaptive.
that written down right now, right?
If we're done, we will bow together in prayer, please. Lord God, we give you thanks for the opportunities that we have to share together, to dream together, to consider what it is that you might be calling us into. We thank you for sisters and brothers who brought us a picture of opportunity and a picture of what the future might look like. And for all of these efforts that we share together, we give you thanks and we trust that you will lead us even into a new day. For it's in Christ we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Joyce and Megan and Lori, can we stay on and find a date to just,
Sure.
Thank you, Lori.
yeah,
Thank you.
great job,
Thanks,
Lori.
Lori.
This is
Good
great.
job.
See you
See you.
guys.
Good job.
Good to see everyone.
I would also be interested in what happened with Illinois, Wisconsin, and Michigan, because they have a completely different template